At this place in history, we're in Brandon, Vermont, with Executive Director of the Vermont Historical Society, Steve Perkins. We're standing out front of a house that's very important to the history of Brandon.
So it is. We're going to explore one of Brandon's most famous native sons, Stephen Douglas, the little giant of the Senate. I think most people remember him from their high school history classes through the Lincoln-Douglas debate. So we talk about the Civil War and states' rights versus slave states and compromise and everything else. So a fascinating figure from American history and born right here in Brandon. So Amanda, we're inside the museum now here in Brandon, and we have Dr. Kevin Thornton here who's going to talk to us a bit about Stephen Douglas.
Well, Douglas was born here in 1813. He was trained as a teenager to be a cabinet maker, and it looked like he was going to be a working man in Vermont. When he was 15 years old was the election of 1828 that Andrew Jackson won. And Jackson's whole theme was the common man, the ordinary person, should be participating in politics. And that just captured Douglas's imagination. The idea that an ordinary boy could grow up to be president was something that carried him for the rest of his life. He winds up in Illinois in 1833. Even though he had no university training of any kind, he announces to the world that he's a lawyer, and he begins to practice law and becomes a politician, and he has a meteoric rise.
But then this guy Lincoln comes along. It runs against him, and they have these Lincoln-Douglas debates.
It's really interesting because in some ways they're the same guy. They both grow up poor. They both have this incredible belief in the democratic promise of America. They dated the same woman for a short while, but slavery divided them. Douglas was a slaveholder. He kind of kept that a secret. He put this plantation in his wife's name, very, very unusual, but it gave him a kind of deniability. Lincoln doesn't necessarily want to eliminate slavery completely in 1860, but he wants to limit it, and that's the basis of their disagreement.
So knowing what we do about the history of Vermont and views on slavery, did the town of Brandon embrace Douglas?
Yeah, that's a great question. Douglas, in 1860, when they run for president against each other, Douglas actually comes back to town, and there's a reception for him here, and everybody goes and shakes his hand, and then on election day, they vote 4-1 in favor of Lincoln. And that's because of the slavery issue, and this town becomes a hotbed of abolitionism in the 1830s into the 1840s, and people here believe slavery is wrong, and that's the issue in 1860, and so they won't vote for their native son.
At this place in history.